Yeah.
Hi. Hi, I'm Dave from Idiot Box Books, and I'm delighted to be joined by the award-winning writers, Mark Shirrefs and John Thomson, writers of The Girl from Tomorrow, Tomorrow's End, the Spellbinder series, and they've also written for shows like Neighbours, Mako Mermaids, The Bureau of Magical Things, The Sleepover Club, and Let the Blood Run Free, which John also directed. So thank you for joining me today, gents.
Very good to be here, Dave.
Happy to be here.
Wonderful. So we are here to talk about the book, or rather books, that we are crowdfunding for on Kickstarter, which is, of course, a reprint of the original Girl from Tomorrow and Tomorrow's End books from the 1990s, and for the first time, a brand new sequel called A New Tomorrow, all of which will be available as part of a new 3-book box set called the Tomorrow Trilogy. So we're here to ask Mark and John some questions, and we will end by talking about the new book. But let's go right back to the beginning. And I wonder if you could both tell me how you both met, please.
We met after you, Mark.
No, it's quite an interesting story that, as it happened, we were both at drama school. Back in 1976 is when we started. And we discovered, no, hang on. Oh, no, John, you've got a good memory of this. What's your take on this? Because you were the one
I
who
have bad
experienced
memories
it.
of it, Mark, because I lived in Sydney, and I knew a friend of yours who said, "Oh, my friend Mark's at drama school." I had nowhere to live, and you kindly put your hand up. And so I moved into your house in the middle of a Melbourne winter and the middle of a relationship breakup. And I figured if I could survive that with Mark Shirrefs, I could survive a lifetime of working with him. But we went to drama school together for nearly 3 years and performed together and worked together, and decided we quite liked it. So yes, we had a wonderful time doing comedies and dramas and directing each other at times.
So at what point
That's where we met.
So you were planning to kind of be in front of the camera to start with, were you? Or?
Well,
Yes, we were both.
Yep, both there as actors,
Yeah.
and had various. Oh, I'm lost for words, John. Sorry, my brain hasn't woken up yet.
Yeah, we were both studying acting, but we also did our own projects while we were there. Mark and I invited Mark to join a company, and we went off to Perth when we were during our holidays one year at drama school, completely against all the rules, and put on 2 shows for a children's theatre company that I used to work for in Perth before I went off to drama school. And that was a real bonding thing. And they were 2 shows that we wrote together. So we started realizing that, we enjoyed doing that. And then when drama school finished, Mark went up to Albury, Wodonga, to set up a community theatre company up there. And I got involved in the comedy scene in Melbourne, which was pretty huge at the time. So I ended up directing lots of stand-up comedians and getting shows together, out of which Let the Blood Run Free came. And Mark and I, we split apart. Well, we never, we didn't work together for some years. And then I was working on a film script with a friend, and for some strange reason, we thought we'd ask Mark to join us. And so Mark came on board to turn this, what had been a musical kids play called The Magic Telescope, into a feature film that's never been made. So if anyone's out there with, I think in the mid 1980s, it was the special effects budget in America came back of 35 million. And that's when we thought this film will never be made. But it could be made by AIs now for nothing, possibly.
That can be our next project.
Yeah. So that was so we started off as actors together, and then and I think both of us got out to the world. I started doing some TV and realized how bad the scripts were, and went, I can do better than this. And I've been writing theatre, so I put my hand to it, and then I went off to film school, and then Mark followed me to the same film school, didn't you, Mark?
I did at the time, yes.
So So we both studied film at Swinburne Film and TV School, and came out with a couple of short films, and then worked on a feature film script. And then we went up to Sydney and we met our old friend Kathy Mueller, who we had also been at drama school with. She was a fellow student of ours, and she'd become a TV director in the intervening years. And she was hating Sydney and decided how good it would be if we could work together. And the very next day we left Sydney, she got a phone call from Film Australia asking her if she was interested in developing a children's TV series. And she said, I will if I can do it with my friends in Melbourne. And so we sent them up the feature script we'd written, and they gave us a go. And that's where Girl from Tomorrow came from. And originally the three of us set out to write it, but then Kathy got another gig. So Mark and I wrote it all, and Kathy directed it. And it was a wonderful experience all around.
Brilliant. So we'll talk about A Girl from Tomorrow in a moment, of course, but I'm really keen. I'm always fascinated by writing partnerships. And I'd love you to tell me a little bit more about how that partnership has kind of historically worked, and why it's endured, and almost what each of you brings to the process that you've obviously found has been a great recipe for success over the years. Yeah, I'd love to kind of delve into that partnership.
I think the fact that we were at drama school together and had a lot of very interesting experiences and worked together, in front of an audience was a great part of that, because we, knew how to could trust each other right from the start of the process. I think the other thing also is, having worked in front of an audience, we very, very aware of what an audience takes from what you write. So having worked in theatre, I think, is a great advantage to working in television, because television writers, most of the time don't actually get to see their work in front of an audience. They're sitting at, people are sitting at home watching your program, and the writers actually don't get the real visceral response of having an audience laugh when you've made a joke and laugh when you fall over, and just generally enjoy the backwards and forwards between the stage and the audience.
Mark and I think the drama school thing gave us a good sense of honesty with each other. Sometimes my wife has heard me talking to Mark on the phone sometimes when we're working together and gone, oh my God, you guys are so, we're brutally honest at times. And over the years, we've learned that honesty works. We've discovered that it's not compromise, but like two points of view, you often can get something that's much better, particularly when we're dealing with the plots and the basic storylines. There's a lot of sometimes quite heated discussions and arguments go on. And then, we found a process working on the first series that we wrote together, where after working on the basic storylines, then we started writing the scripts, and we would both write early on like the same scenes, just opening scenes and stuff, and see that what similar tones we had. And then we do scene breakdowns of every episode, and then early on, I might do half an ep and Mark would do the other half an ep, and then we'd edit each other's work and talk about it. But it came down to the level of, what's this mean? And I go, that's a joke, Mark. And he goes, well, why is that funny? And I go, well, because that. And he goes, well, I'd forgotten that. You have to remind me about that again before. I went, okay. So it was like that, actually pulling jokes apart at times.
Yeah.
And also, finding those. But the other thing about both studying acting was, and it's amazing, there's a lot of writers who have done a bit of acting because, or a lot of actors who have become writers, because we're actually, in some ways, you can go trained and experienced in getting into the heads of characters. So, and you find that as you're writing a series, the first episode takes forever to write, and the second one takes, half of forever, and then the third one, oh my God, that was quite easy, and the fourth one. And so by the time you're halfway through, you know the characters, you know how they will respond and what they're thinking and what they're feeling. And so if you get through the first few eps, then actually it becomes a joy to write. The first few eps, that's when I think a lot of relationships and partnerships probably break down. But, we've walked down in high dudgeon from each other at times in the office and, got angry. Well, I tend to get more angry than Mark. Mark goes quiet, I go angry, I go loud. We never hit each other, though, not once, only in jest. Yeah. Yeah.
Wonderful. So you mentioned Kathy there, of course, the Girl from Tomorrow's director. So Kathy's come to you with this project she's working on. Tell us a little bit more about the kind of brief and how the project had come about, how Kathy had got on board, and kind of, I suppose, what you first heard about it.
Okay. It was a company called Film Australia it's a big government organisation. It's unfortunately no longer in existence, and they made documentaries. But one of their executive producers wanted to get into children's television, so The Girl from Tomorrow was the first one off the rank, and this is Ron Saunders. Ron had the idea. So the idea of a girl, so like a teenage girl from the future being marooned back in our time, that was the brief. As far as I remember, that'd be right, Mark? It was basically a one-liner.
It was a one-liner which we then developed.
Yeah. So, and then Kathy came on board, and we only had like sort of a couple of talks on the phone and stuff before Kathy had to drop out of the situation. But anyway, we were given a Guernsey to go ahead in the first stage, and they liked our work, and it kept going.
So how did you start to flesh out a show like that? So talk me through the process. You've got one line. How do you then turn that into 12 fully written 25-minute episodes?
Well, it's as John was saying before about character, it's actually who are the people involved in this story? What's their story? What's their journey through the arc of the series? And I think that's the starting place for all of these things. Is if someone's in that situation, then you have to put yourself into their mind, which again is the result of being an actor. It's a good thing to have done, and follow their objectives. What do they want? What's the situation? What are the obstacles they come up against? And one of the greatest discoveries of the series was the villain Silverthorn, who was the bandit from the 25th century who kidnapped Alana and caused the whole problem in the first place. And he was really enjoyed writing Silverthorn, and I think the actor John Howard enjoyed playing him very much.
Yeah, there's absolutely some brilliant characters in there. And I think, first of all, what always stands out to me about the show, especially compared to what most people were doing in the 80s and 90s in terms of depicting the future, was very kind of Blade Runner-esque. It was, spaceships flying. It was kind of gritty dystopian. It was skyscrapers, traditionally futuristic. And you went in a really different, unique direction. Obviously, having this idea that there'd been a terrible disaster in the Northern Hemisphere, and almost society had gone back to its very basics, in terms of the year 3000 as you depicted it. And I think to some degrees it's very ahead of its time, the show. It talks about climate catastrophe, which apart from, I know in the 80s there was a big theme of the ozone layer, but I think that certainly compared to how big a topic that is now, I think you were probably one of the first dramatic works to be really creating that as a central part of the show. So I'd love you to tell me about your depiction of the year 3000. Where did that come from?
I think one of the things we thought, it was obvious talking to the executive producer and stuff, that we couldn't in the first season recreate a massive new world that was going. We had not a big budget at all. So partly we went, well, okay, we'll set the thing outside in tropical. So it was partly that, but it was also very much aware that if this was going to be mainly shot in contemporary times and it need to be a girl from the future in peril, then if she'd come from a world where she was living on her wits and it was a dangerous place the whole time, then the 1990s would seem like the most incredibly peaceful place she'd ever been to. So we kind of reversed that, said, okay, so she lives in a time now where she is, which is peaceful and everybody works for each other and stuff. And then she comes back to a world which is full of a technology she doesn't know. And it seems incredibly dangerous to her. And we got a lot of good comedy out of that. And also a great deal of tension. I mean, obviously, other than the tension that she's suddenly found herself 1,000 years away from everything she knows and loves. But it was partly a contrast with that. And then putting Silverthorne's time in the middle of it, that's when things are really bad. So the year 2500. Possibly the only thing we got really wrong was we were stretching it out a lot longer than we might have, I think. Like, if so anyway, it's all a bit scary. But we also, both of us, did a lot of reading and were involved in stuff. So, it's not like we were unaware that there was a climate problem. So, but, we weren't as aware of how serious it was. It is back then.
Yeah, that's really helpful. And you mentioned comedy there, and I think absolutely, I think your writing has this wonderful kind of thread of comedy running through it. Kind of dramatic comedy. They're not out now comedy shows, but I think even if you rewatch the show, as I did recently, obviously in preparation for this book, it struck me just how witty some of the lines are from the characters. Think of some dialogue from Irene, for instance, and I think that I'm really interested. Is that how you think? Would you say that kind of same strand of taking the opportunity to insert comedy when appropriate and when you can kind of runs through your work?
I think that's what runs through my life in a lot of ways. I mean, it's my father was a very funny man. My son's now doing a lot of comedy improv. It's like there is a kind of genetic disposition, I think, to comedy. But I also, I had a career directing comedy. Like, that's what I did. And I worked in terms of live theatre, live comedy. And then after Let the Blood Run Free, I had a career directing comedy for television. I do have a strong comic background, really. And comedy is what I naturally sort of gravitate to. I mean, Mark and I, for a while, we had a street show, just the two of us. What were our names? Something Brothers.
Fred and Frank Frantic. The Frantic
Brothers. Yeah. And we used to go around busking and performing with yellow buckets on our heads. I used
multicolored tights.
Multicolored tights. We were hideous, really. I used to walk across a ladder on my hands, a horizontal ladder, and Mark would operate the puppet ferrets underneath the ladder that I was going to fall into and be devoured. Like, it was so stupid. But hey, people used to put money in our tin, didn't they, Mark?
They did.
That can be our next Kickstarter. Then we'll do
Bring back the Frantic Brothers.
Yeah. Coming back to the bookshelf near you. So how about production? Was there anything that, in terms of, you perhaps had scripted, but budget or SFX, such as it was, made it prohibitive? Or what do you remember about the production of the show?
Well, at that time... You go, John.
I was going to say the production actually happened up in Sydney and we were in Melbourne. So we were not that involved in the actual production. We went up for a few days and had had a bit of a look at the sets and stuff, but we weren't around while they were shooting it. So it was really like sitting at home waiting for the rushes to arrive. We were getting the rushes and stuff, which is unusual, because we were writing the novels. It was a part of a deal to publish the first novel to come out at the same time as the series. So we were writing the novel at the time the series was being shot. And so we were having a look at stuff and find, because they make changes when they're shooting. But they were like wonderful experience. My favorite was when Petey steals the transducer and goes into the kids' playground to take on the bullies. And we hadn't written it like this, but Kathy turned it into a Western shootout. Yeah. So we're watching it and it's got the Western music and the Western posing and looking at the bad guys through his legs and stuff. And when that happens in your writers, it's just brilliant, because we just run roaring with laughter, going, she absolutely nailed that scene. So there was really good experiences. That stuff we hadn't written, that then the actors and the director and the costuming and all that take over and enhance that. Inevitably, there's a few things, not so much with Girl from Tomorrow, but in other shows I've done, where it goes the other way and you go, oh, what have you done? No, you've ruined the comedy of that scene. But Kathy was a very good director.
I know. Sorry, go on, Mark.
Sorry, no, I was just going to say this was, you know, our first TV show, so it was a really signal experience and terribly exciting. And those visits that John's mentioned to Sydney were extraordinary. I remember the first time we went up to Film Australia, where the studio was, and we walked into the set for Petey's bedroom. And the production designer was a very talented man called Nick McCallum. And we had written, you know, the boy's bedroom is a science fiction fan. He's got, you know, science fiction paraphernalia. But Nick had created this whole wall of Lego, a Lego computer. And it was like the realization that what you create as a writer, somebody else's imagination will take what you've done and like really run with it, like John was saying. And it was an extraordinary and so exciting to actually see what somebody else had done with the words that you'd written.
Yeah, I can imagine. And what about when the show actually went out and you saw that kind of finished program? Did it meet your expectations, would you say?
I remember go on, Mark, after you.
I'm going to say it exceeded my expectations. It was so exciting. And John, you elaborate on that.
I was going to say the same thing too, that it was, you know, it was a wonderful experience when it went to air. But and it sounds bizarre, but to see your names at the front of something, and which in those days was very unusual for writers in Australia to get their names in the opening titles. So that was a really good, really, oh my God, they put us up front. It was like, that was terrific. And then, and, you know, I'm a great lover of the use of music in shows, and the music really enhanced it. And we'd seen rushes, and suddenly everything's, of course, been color graded, and the sounds all been mixed, and, you know, and it looked, you know, it just looked $1 million. And the effects have come on, which, you know, we'd never seen any of the effects. And some of them look a bit hokey now, but they held up really well back then.
Yeah, I'm a big believer that shows that I think in retrospect we think of as kind of iconic and that stand the test of time, you often look back and think every facet of it is working incredibly well. So brilliant writing, I think brilliant cinematography, you know, it's all shot on film, which, you know, I think gives it that kind of epic look. I think great music, as you say, and I think that although, like you say, it's really easy to look back and kind of see effects through the lens of what we all see today. But actually, it's very ambitious for its time. I think, you know, it's doing things that you probably weren't seeing much in 1990, frankly. And I think that's all, you know, all to its credit. You mentioned there the book deal. So was that something that you'd done before, written a novel, or was that new territory for you as well?
That was completely new territory. That was organised by Film Australia. I don't even know where it came from. We were just approached and asked, would we like to? And we went, sure, that sounds like fun. I mean, the actual, in actual fact, because we did the same with the second Girl from Tomorrow and all the Spellbinder books. And it's just, it's not the most creative job turning a TV series into a novel. There's a lot of putting inverted commas around speech and describing a room that you've seen, like, you know. So, I mean, look, it was okay. It was a job. But and it was great when they came out, and, you know, and seeing them. I still get the occasional check from the library. So, you know, you get more residuals from the libraries, never get a cent out of the TV series. So, you know. So
Dave, if I could just go back to what you were saying before about the degree of sophistication with the Girl from Tomorrow, which I agree, a lot of resources were put into it. And an interesting comparison is Kathy Mueller and was working on a big budget international co-production series called The Magistrate. That's the job that she had to go off and do instead of developing The Girl from Tomorrow. So at the Australian Film Institute Awards in 1990, I think it was, The Girl from Tomorrow and The Magistrate were up against each other in 3 categories. And at that time, for a children's television show to be up against a big budget international co-production was an extraordinary thing. And And I think the things that you've mentioned, the sophistication, the filmmaking, the script, the direction, the acting, all of those things were just, one of those wonderful examples of when things come together and work really well as a whole.
Yeah, absolutely.
And anyway, that's all I wanted to say. It was just interesting that we should be in the same league as the big budget production.
Yeah, absolutely. And I know I think I tracked some of the production staff on Girlfriend Tomorrow, especially in the kind of design and VFX department, and they went on to bigger and better things. I think they worked on The Matrix in the kind of late 90s, which I think was produced out of Sydney as well. So it obviously was a bit of a breeding ground for talent.
Yeah.
Can you remember much of that? Oh, sorry, go on, John.
I was going to say, the other thing I just, sorry, talking about the script writing, of course, for Mark and I, it was quite a learning curve writing our first TV series. And so I should just mention that Ron Saunders, who was executive producer, was a very good story man. He was very good at narrative. So we got lots of good feedback from him. And then Noel Price came on as the producer. And he also, they were both much more experienced there. So we got good script editing on our scripts. But I remember we were in Melbourne, and Kathy had a big meeting in Sydney, and she got on the phone and she said, "Oh my God," she said, "you're not going to like this, but they want to cut Carl." Now, Carl was Jenny Kelly's father in the series, and we love Carl. He was he was hilariously funny. He was like an estranged father who was a sports journalist, used to be a sportsman, and we had lots of good gags with him. And we were furious. We were going to get in the car and drive to Sydney and have it out with this bastard who didn't know what he was saying. And then we got on the phone with him, and we're going, "Why?" And he said, "Well, it's a kids series, and the kids have to sort it all out, not have their father ride in on a white horse and solve everything." And we went, "Oh, yeah, that's a good point." So we had to cut Carl, and then we brought him back for 4 episodes of Spellbinder. Like 10 years later, we went, "It's Carl," and so he actually lived. He was like, it was great. So
I think
nothing goes to waste.
He only exists as a broken photograph, doesn't he? I think in the final show.
Yes, but he then later got played by Peter O'Brien in the Spellbinder series, and it was great.
I'll have to rewatch Spellbinder with that in mind. Then, and now I know that was it. We'll try and get one more question in before we do our break. So, can you remember much about the reaction to the show? And were you aware that it was being kind of sold and syndicated around the world, and that broadcasters like the BBC were showing it in the UK, for instance, and kind of how did that feel?
The response here was very good. The reviews in the press were all, terrifically laudatory. I think everyone was very excited by it. Children's television doesn't have that big a profile, as I'm sure you're aware. Its existence was brought about in some ways by the introduction of a quota system in Australia, which has now since disappeared, and there's been a real drop in the production of children's television here from the heyday of when we were around. But we were very pleased by the response to it and aware that it was being sold overseas, but I personally wasn't aware of the impact, Dave, that you've talked about it in Britain, because it sounded like it was huge in Britain.
Yeah, no, it absolutely was, Mark. I mean, I'm a child of the 80s. And yeah, I think that because there was only probably 4 channels in the UK at that time, and obviously the BBC is a broadcaster that's kind of known around the world, and you kind of only got about 2 hours of children's programming a day. So this would have been, The Girlfriend Tomorrow would have been in that kind of cherished tea time slot, and then I think it was repeated a couple of times as well. And I think, again, compared to most contemporary shows that we were watching, which tended to be multi-camera kind of studio videotape shows, which kind of always looked a bit cheap and cheerful, I think this was something different, in terms of being that little bit more ambitious. Let's talk then about series 2. So Tomorrow's End. Did you always know that there was going to be a second run of 12, or was it kind of contingent on the success of the first? Or yeah, kind of when did you first hear that there'd be, you know, another gig the following year, so to speak?
We hadn't ever planned to do a second series, I don't think. So it was a surprise. And my understanding is that we got the second series because the first series actually did really well. So Channel 9 wanted more of, you know, more of the same.
Lovely. So had you almost set the kind of, you could say, ends on a cliffhanger in terms of Jenny's injured and needs to travel back to the year 3000? Did you kind of just throw that in as a maybe it'll be something we can pick up later, or if not, it's an interesting ending?
I guess we must have. I mean, it did seem like it was a good ending, because it left it open, and it left, you know, the audience open, imagining what could happen, rather than everything went back to the way it was, which is boring.
Yeah.
So it was that. So maybe, I don't remember there being talk of a sequel, but maybe there had. But it was certainly leaving it as an open way. I can remember we felt really good when we came up with that as an ending. Oh my God, right. So she's actually mortally injured. That's serious. But we could take her into the future, but leaving it then, and then leaving the mother going like, oh my God, are we ever going to see them again? But also, you know, so it was great. But then knowing with time travel, they could come back a minute later, and, you know, so yeah, it felt like a good ending. I don't remember us thinking sequels, but maybe we were. It was a while ago. Yeah.
So I mean, you went in quite a different direction, which I think again was a great thing, because I think so often you're used to, you know, in TV or indeed film, the sequel being somewhat a retelling of the first film, whereas, you know, they're very different, really, kind of stylistically, and I think that absolutely works to its benefit. So where did the kind of slightly darker storyline of Tomorrow's End come in?
I think that Silverthorne had been such a powerful influence in the first series, and the world that he came from was the world that we hadn't seen anything of. We'd seen a bit of the world in the year 3000, but the world of 2500 was somewhere new to explore. So I guess at least part of the impetus came from, let's take the audience somewhere they hadn't been before and see what it's like there. John, have you got a thought on how that came about?
I think it's like we needed to sort of up the stakes. You're right. We couldn't just have. I mean, Alana just coming back for what? A holiday didn't make sense. Because we'd set up this idea of the great disaster, that something had gone horribly wrong, which was the reason for the very first time travel experiment at the start of Girl from Tomorrow, that she goes back to try and figure out what caused the destruction of the Northern Hemisphere. So it was then. So we had a target time where bad stuff happened. So we went, well, let's go there and figure out what it was, because we really just come up with the idea of the great disaster. We had no idea what it was or what it was caused by, or that Silverthorne had anything to do with it, which, of course, at the time of the first book, he hadn't. He was just like a gangster leader. But then time travel can actually cause problems itself. So we went, okay. So then Silverthorne became central to that disaster. So, yeah. So
and did you visit any of the sets there? So I mean, again, quite ambitious, isn't it? I mean, was that mostly a studio band, the kind of the year 2500, or was it a kind of mix of night shots and studio work from memory?
Film Australia found an old wool shed near Mascot Airport in Sydney, which was spacious, but it was full of years and years of sheep manure and bird droppings and whatnot. So the process involved a whole bunch of work experienced people coming in and with brooms and face masks and getting rid of the years of rubbish. And then it was all the sets from the show were built there, I think. I can't remember whether they went back to Film Australia as well, but it was a great place to site the show because they could build a lot of stuff there. There was room for the unit trucks and whatnot, and it provided some interesting, visuals for the place where Nick lived. And Noel, or the production designer, built the street that, like the market street in the year 2500. The Blade Runner shot moving through all the various strange looking people dressed in a variety of interesting costumes and selling different things. It was a good choice, I think, rather than trying to do things on location. And it's because a lot of it was shot. The biggest problem was the planes coming and going. So the Mascot Airport was quite close, so the shoot had to stop while the planes passed by, and that proved to be a bit of a problem. But the result, I think, is good.
Yeah, absolutely. And did you ever think of a third series, or did you know that this was probably it in terms of? It feels more like, in retrospect, the end of Tomorrow's End is the final. It's tied in a ribbon somewhat more than the first series. So, can you remember? Was there ever a thought of doing more, or did you feel like you'd told the story as it stood then?
I remember us fantasizing about a possible third series, which we realized would probably have to go up into space to be somewhere quite different. But nobody was sort of that interested in nobody was pushing for a third series. And I think it felt like it had done it. The journey was there, it was complete. It was more us just, thinking, well, if we wanted to, would we? But then, we got involved in other projects, and Spellbinder came along, and so we came up with a whole new set of storylines and characters. But the Alana and Jenny were still very close to your heart, so it was like, I don't think we pursued it with any great thing because people, everyone just sort of moved on to something else. And I don't think there was, it felt like you're saying, it was rounded off. It didn't need, unlike a lot of TV series today, see, I'm so sick of like the third series, you think, just bloody make a decision and resolve it. Everything's open to see if it goes so well, you get another. So nothing actually is satisfying with, that's why I like short, like eight episode stories, because like they have a beginning and a middle and an end, not a beginning, a middle, and then what will happen. So, yeah.
And I know some of the cast of Girl from Tomorrow say they still get a lot of kind of fan mail and interest. Do you still hear from fans from time to time? And are you surprised that the show's kind of survived in the consciousness for all these years? Would that have surprised you if we could go back in time and tell you kind of some 35 years ago that this was a show that people would really remember?
Yes, absolutely. I still get contacted by people. I've had a couple of people trying to track down the books of the series, people who are just fans of it, and they say thank you for doing it. I had one extraordinary young woman in Israel created a whole graphic novel, which she sent me, of her take on the series and how it affected her life. And the show's had surprising effects on people. I've had people say to me it helped pull them through a depressive period in their life. I guess there's something about the nature of the triumph of two young teenage girls against forces far greater than they are, which resonates with people, and to use that word that's used a lot, empowers them to live their lives in the best way they can and find the courage to beat the things that are beating them down.
There was a fantastic story of a young girl who was competing in the Paralympics, Australian girl, and she got the 3 like tattoos on her cheek, and she won gold medals.
Wow.
Basically competing as Alana. I mean, she called herself Alana, but that was a real buzz. So her competing with those 3 dots on her face.
That's superb, isn't it?
Yeah.
So fast forward to last year, you get an email from me where I discussed the idea of republishing the first 2 books on Kickstarter, the crowdfunding platform. and mentioned that I think we should do a new sequel, a third book. So yeah, was that somewhat of a surprise? Yeah, I'd love you to kind of tell me, you know, when you both read that, what the initial reaction was.
Who
Well,
is this crazy dude in England? I think we went, like, you know, it was out of the blue. It was a shock. It was like, okay. I mean, I remember saying to Mike, Dave Crichton, that's not real. He's in Red Dwarf. So it was like, what? And because I don't know in Australia whether it happens in Australia, but I'd never heard of the idea of crowdfunding a novel. Like, so it was, apart from the fact that, you know, someone's turned up who remembers the books, which was great, but the idea of crowdfunding a novel was complete out of nowhere. So yeah, it was a big surprise.
yes.
Mark Freeze. And I suppose once we'd sorted out the logistics and you decided, thankfully, it was worth giving it a go. Obviously, I'm sure your thoughts then turned to what might the story be,
Yeah.
and not only, I suppose, have you then got the same challenge you would have had, you know, back in the early 90s, you know, where do you go? Do you go into space thematically? Also, you've got the fact that the kids are no longer teenagers. They are, you know, at best, probably in their mid to late 40s. And yeah, obviously going to be a very different story. But yeah, where did your mind go in terms of what story you could tell?
Well, this
Um,
is the most extraordinary opportunity to examine the lives of two people who knew each other as teenagers, and as you say, have lived a whole lot of life in the intervening years, and you know have gone in very different directions, and a chance to examine that in the context not of many of other films like these where people who haven't seen each other get together. It's quite often in the nature of a romantic film in trying to figure out whether the feelings they once had for each other are the same. But to do it in the context of an adventure story where the fate of the world hangs in the balance is quite an interesting challenge. And I think that's one of the things that I found attractive about this. And it makes the job of writing the book a challenge, because you're writing it for people who knew these characters as teenage girls and are going to be very interested to see how they turn up as adults. But you know, for people who are coming to the story for the first time, what's it going to appear to be like for them? They're going to have to go back and read the other books in order to make sense of it. But you know, the challenge of doing these girls as adult characters with all of the life they've lived in between and how that affects their relationship, which was the absolute core of the first series, is just going to be a lot of fun, I think.
hmm. um, I just want to disagree with Mark slightly there. I don't think everyone will have to go back and read the original books to make sense of the new one. I think that's a challenge for us as writers, that the new one makes sense as a standalone novel. If it stimulates people to want to go back and read the first one's great. But certainly in the way that the dialogue and the story works out, it should be pretty clear for people who haven't read the original books. But um, hopefully the other ones get reread as well. But of course, with time travel, we also had the possibility that it could have been an older Alana coming back to the 1990s, meeting a young 14-year-old Jenny, or it could have been a young Alana who'd really just got back to the future, had to turn around and come back again, but came back 30 years later. So we could have had a young Alana and an old Jenny. We talked about all these possibilities, and then really got quite excited with the idea that it was two women with whole lives of experiences between them, for whom that 14-year-old experience was almost a bit of a dream, really. Like, you know, particularly for Jenny, she's got on with her life, and you know, and had some very strong experiences, and so, you know, like the idea of her once close friend coming back. I mean, it's virtually like they're dead to each other, really. There's thousands of years between them. So that became very exciting for us. And the idea of using our life experience too, you know, to really think about, you know, what it's like. Because even though neither of us are middle-aged women, but we've known quite a few.
Absolutely. And yeah, without kind of obviously with these things, we always want to balance not telling people everything that is about to happen in the new book. But are you kind of able to give us a glimpse into some of the themes and kind of ideas that you'll be exploring in the new book?
I think that the really hardest thing for us to do was, like, after the first two stories, it became pretty obvious that time travel is dangerous, and that the time travel experiment's been put away in the future because it changes the past and changes the future. So if things go wrong, you could end up wiping the future. So once we started going back, and we went back, of course, and reread the first two books and watched the series, and realized that, in actual fact, once she thought about it for a while, Alana had made some mistakes in the year 2500, which had actually led to the destruction of the Northern Hemisphere. And so we started to think, well, she's probably carrying a bit of trauma from all that. Now she's grown up and gone, how do you forgive yourself from those childhood mistakes you make? But still, then we thought, well, she's not just going to travel back in time to catch up with her old friend. So we had to realize an existential threat. It had to be something that was so huge that there was no choice but to steal the time capsule from where it had been, locked away, and head off back into the past because it was on her. So it took quite a while to come up with that. And then, it went, okay, I think we've got it. Here we go. So, yeah, so the idea of, aliens, which is like a good sci-fi trope, but, I see just recently there's something coming through the solar system soon that could be aliens. So, I just hope it lands on Washington, but there we go.
Wonderful. And so this time, obviously, it'll be slightly different in terms of, rather than kind of adapting a script to novel. I suppose this will give you the freedom to kind of, have your $30 million or $300 million production if you want, because it's all on the written page. And I suppose you can be that bit more ambitious, freed from the constraints of could this be filmed and could we afford it?
That's true. I don't think we've actually had that conversation to realize that, but it's more like, yes, you're right, because normally when you're writing TV, you're thinking about what costs money and, we won't be able to afford to do that. So yes, we don't have those problems at all, but it's more like just going, oh my God, this is a big book for adults. How do we make this work? Rather than, we can do anything. But it's still got to fit into the storyline. It's still got to fit into making sense. I mean, there's no point just writing action for the sake of it. But yes, it can be big, and we're certainly going into space, and we'll be going to places and backgrounds that don't exist on Earth. So that's so that's exciting. And getting much more into, now we can, the society in the year 3000, which we had talked about back in the past, but we could never do it. But, what sort of cities do they live in? What is the state of the world? That, how much has been reclaimed? Is there dangers in this world? It's not paradise. It seemed like paradise in the first series, but in actual fact, it's not, because they're reclaiming a damaged planet, which was talked about in the original books, but we never actually saw it. But yeah, so it's not a futuristic heaven by any means.
And I noticed, you killed off the Northern Hemisphere rather than the Southern Hemisphere, which I think's frankly unforgivable from my perspective.
If we'd killed the Southern Hemisphere, then Alana couldn't have come to visit in Sydney. So don't take it personally, Dave. However, it is true that most destructive things that have destroyed the planet have come from the Northern Hemisphere.
Yeah. And they do say, I think there might be parts of Australia and New Zealand that are considered one of the safest areas in the event of nuclear fallout. So, that's something to look forward to.
Yes, it's Melbourne. We've seen what was the that fabulous film on the beach.
On the
Yeah,
beach.
yeah, yeah. So where Melbourne was the last place where anyone lived, but
Yeah.
it didn't matter. It came here anyway.
So we obviously, I think with crowdfunding, the challenge is always reaching the fans, letting them know that this new book and indeed the other books are going to be available. Yeah, I would love you to kind of reach out, both of you, and just say a few words if a fan is watching this. Yeah, why should they buy the book, and why should they find out what happens to Alana, Jenny, and all of the characters that they remember so fondly?
Well, it'll make us feel really good.
It's a good
Say
reason.
that again, Mark.
It'll make us feel really good. I think, the worst thing that could happen is that actually nobody buys the book and we, feel really bad and end our lives on a low point rather than a high point.
I like that.
Yeah, but also, I mean, I think I can't think of another science fiction book that's got two middle-aged women right at the forefront who are actually finding like that's a very novel idea. I remember when we were doing the original series, some people thought it wouldn't work because it had two girls in the main characters and science fiction was all for boys. And that was proved very wrong. And boys enjoyed watching it as much as girls did. And it's actually a chance. I know a lot of women don't read science fiction, but there's hopefully quite a lot of women out there who really enjoyed The Girl from Tomorrow, who might just take a go at this to read this and go, oh, this is pretty good. Because science fiction, it's just drama set in a more exotic location, really. And it's talking about the world we live in. And it will be funny because, I mean, already just bunching ideas around, there's wonderful comedy between Alana and Jenny. And because Jenny now, because she became a musician. She's had a hard life. She's got involved in drug, sex, and rock and roll, and she's had a child, and the marriage is broken up, and like life is not great for her, but she's had a great life, if that makes sense. And so then this person from the future comes. You got to get back on the horse again. You got to risk your life again. It's like, oh my God, no. Help. But also the idea of what it is, reassessing your life in middle age. I don't think it matters that much whether you're male or female. It's like, okay, when a challenge arises, do you step up or not? We have all those things in our own lives, whether it's a lot smaller than, existential threat to the planet. But, it's exciting. And then the whole thing about having children and families and ailing mothers and all the stuff that's there in our domestic lives, but turned over now into an adventure story is very exciting for me to be confronting. So, and it's taken a long time for us to come up with a storyline that deals with all the things we want to deal with. But I think now we're very happy with the story we've got and that sort of seeing ideas that we've been developing. And, so Mark and I, and that's been, look, I've got to say, the great thing about this crazy guy in England contacting us and stuff is that it's got me and Mark working together again. We hadn't done that for a few years. We've tried to get other projects off the ground in the last few years, but the funding bodies here are not really set up anymore to give money to old white men. And so we found the idea of us developing another TV series particularly hard. And it wasn't happening. So we tried that, then sort of put it away. And then this idea has come along again. And so you appeared and we've gone, actually, I think he's real. And so we started, doing a lot of talking on the phone and sending each other writing stuff. And that's been really good for us to just go, oh, the writing partnership has come back together again. So, that will hopefully continue. I mean, the great thing about crowdfunding is you do get a sense, or we will get a sense of whether there's an audience out there for this idea.
Yeah.
And so it's great. We're not going to have to waste a year of our lives writing something nobody ever reads. I mean, if enough people do it, we'll go. It might. I don't know how many hundreds of people that is to get the thing funded, but then we at least know we've got an audience of several hundred that are definitely going to read the book, or at least start it. So
absolutely.
And just to follow on from what John said, the process of us getting together again to work together is a bit like Alana and Jenny getting back together again after all that time. And, you know, we've been working together on different projects for quite a few years, and our experiences in those different worlds will bring different perspectives, just in the same way as Alana and Jenny will have different perspectives. So the two journeys are an interesting mirror of each other.
Absolutely. And we won't talk too much about the next series after Girl from Tomorrow and Tomorrow's End, because, you know, if all goes well with this, who knows, we might be having a similar conversation to this next year about Spellbinder. But I'm sure the Spellbinder fans wouldn't forgive me if we didn't at least talk about it for a moment. And I think I'm right in saying that was kind of mid-90s and another Film Australia production, is that right?
yes,
Yes.
it was same executive producer, same producer as from Girl from Tomorrow. And it kind of came out, they were doing another series overseas. It was like a kids spy series with various locations. And at the last day, it was all being done, and then suddenly a possibility opened up because it was a fantastic way of funding stuff. So it would be Australia and another country, and the other country would pay half the cost of their 4 episodes, but for that they would get to show the whole 16-part series or whatever. So it was a great deal for overseas. It worked really well, but suddenly Poland wanted in, and the writers were all rewriting. So we got a phone call saying, you know, you and Mark, can you come to Poland next week? So we suddenly found ourselves in Poland coming up out of the fantastic experiences that everybody had working with Polish television, because they're all Polish film is so strong. And it was just cheap to film there. So it was then like try and come up with a big project we can do in Poland. So another one, you know, shot on film, the whole thing. And so, and that was Spellbinder came in, the idea of a boy or a kid finding themselves in a parallel universe that's basically run by magic that turns out not to be magic, but another form of science. That was basically the idea that we then ran with. So that again was a wonderful experience, because unlike Girl from Tomorrow, we actually got to travel. So, you know, they sent the writers to Poland to look for what was there, to write for the locations rather than write stuff and then look for it. So we got to travel around Poland, and then later with the second series, travel around China, looking for locations to write into stories, which was great. And
was the reason for kind of swapping it up and having all new characters and all new settings in the second series of Spellbinder, was that also for kind of co-production reasons, or?
Yes, because then they sent us to China to come up with an idea for a series, because China, they had a deal going with Shanghai Film Studios, and so we got set. But it was like, it would be great if it was another Spellbinder, but it doesn't need to be. So that was the idea. And then as we traveled around China, the best idea we had was using a kind of, you know, and then we went, oh, what if this is, because it's parallel universe stuff, not time travel. So we're going, so what if Australia was colonized by the Chinese back in the 1400s, and now they've developed technology now, so it's like China, but it's not. So that was, and once we got onto that idea, then we went, okay, we're off and running, and you know, and the whole Chinese experience was pretty good, I've got to say. Yeah. There was oh no, I won't tell that joke. It's okay.
And if you look at Mark and John's kind of IMDb, you'll see that they've both kind of been responsible for hundreds of episodes of television. So what about now? You mentioned you haven't had the opportunity to work together recently, but kind of what projects are you both involved in? It might be writing related or not these days. Tell us a little bit about Mark and John in 2025, notwithstanding our new book, of course.
Well, when I got so rudely interrupted with this, I was writing a novel of my own. So I'm writing a comic thriller. So and writing on my own because I think it's partly because I'm an identical twin, but I'm very good in partnerships, but perhaps lacking some things when it's working on my own. So sometimes it's a bit of a struggle. But I'm a fair way through the second draft of that. So I'm just ploughing on with that. Hopefully I'll be pretty good position with it by the time I get a call from you saying, yes, the crowdfunding's in. We've got 10 million pounds to play with. So that's what I've been doing, plus little bits and pieces of stuff for other people, but mainly writing on my own stuff. Whereas Mark's been doing a bit of stuff actually working for other people.
How about you, Mark?
Yeah, I've been working with a producer of the Mermaid series, H2O and Mako Mermaids, and Bureau of Magical Things on some ideas. The problem is always getting finance. And here in Australia, it's become particularly difficult since the quota system went down, particularly for kids' TV. So trying to find international co-production partners who want to participate in perpetuating the idea of mermaids around the world.
Brilliant. Well, I can tell you my daughters both adored the Mako Mermaid series, so they were absolutely fans. And I hadn't even clocked the name at the time. It was only when I went back and looked in. And of course, they'd been made to watch The Girl from Tomorrow and absolutely adored it, which was one of the reasons that I reached out to you. So, well, thank you ever so much for your time. Is there anything that I haven't asked you that you kind of would have expected or wanted to say?
No.
I can't think of anything. No.
Well, I just want to thank you for your time then, and just remind everybody that all these great ideas, all these wonderful plans, it's all over to you now. So in order to write the book, we need you to get onto Kickstarter, pledge your support in return for a copy of the book. And that can be anything from an ebook, which we've tried to make as affordable as we absolutely can, through to your copy of the new book, or all three, in terms of the New Tomorrow trilogy and a whole host of other rewards as well. So please do support the book, and then we can bring The Girl from Tomorrow back and find out what happens to all of our favourite characters. So Mark and John, thank you ever so much.
Pleasure, Dave. We'll talk soon.
Pleasure, Dave. Thank you.